The business secretary, Jacob Rees-Mogg, has appeared across the nation's broadcasters, and he has told one whopper after another. Let's start with him discussing a report from the International Monetary Fund. Here's Rees-Mogg talking to Michelle Hussain on Radio 4's Today programme.
Interestingly, the IMF, which is not usually particularly well disposed to this government, has indicated that we will get more growth next year, and that is obviously in part a consequence of the fiscal event that we had earlier in September.
Have you read all of what the IMF said yesterday?
Not every word of what the IMF has said.
Well, then let me tell you that it slashed its growth projection for the UK's GDP to 0.3% in 2023. That is down from what it thought in April. It's also saying that the UK is on course to suffer the highest average inflation rates of any major economy in 2022 and 2023. It's expecting inflation to remain high next year, 9%, and it's also expecting unemployment to rise from its current low to as much as 4.8% in 2023.
As I said, the IMF is not normally a friend of this government, and I have a feeling that it will be...
You picked out one bit, and you then don't seem to like the rest of it.
I said it's not normally a friend.
So either you like their assessments or you don't like their assessments.
I said it's not normally a friend. So the fact that it has one figure that is sympathetic to the government in terms of the IMF is a triumph.
So the IMF's predictions are generally unfriendly and false, and that proves that when one of them is in the government's favour, it's true. But even the cherry-picked fact is on shaky ground. Rees-Mogg said that the IMF predicted, quote, that we will get more growth next year. And he is right on one level. The IMF have said that thanks to the package introduced by the government, principally the energy freeze, growth will be marginally higher than it otherwise would be. But the overall figures for growth are still very, very poor. So at a projected 0.3%, UK growth is predicted to be well below that of most of the G7. And combined with the prediction of higher inflation and unemployment, it's going to feel like a recession to most of us. Over on Sky, Kay Burley asked Rees-Mogg about pensions and specifically about the Governor of the Bank of England's statement that after Friday, he won't be able to protect them any longer by injecting cash into the gilts market.
Andrew Bailey thought it was concerning enough to offer emergency help that will be withdrawn. He says, on Friday, I'm saying to you, how concerned should we be that the Governor of the Bank of England in this very important job has said, come Friday, they're on the road?
Well, the Bank of England is obviously operationally independent, and that's quite right. And the Governor will make decisions in accordance with the markets. But the Bank of England does have a responsibility, and has had a responsibility for a very long time, to ensure the orderly functioning of markets, and therefore it intervenes from time to time when there are unexpected events.
So what unexpected event is Rees-Mogg talking about? Was it a natural disaster that shook the pound? Was it an unforeseen international economic crisis that freaked the markets out? No, it was his government's mini-budget, which wasn't unexpected because they wrote it. And if the effects were unexpected, that's only because they refused to let the OBR make an independent economic forecast. Clearly, what's happening here is that Rees-Mogg is saying the Bank of England and not the government is responsible for any pensions crisis that might happen after Friday. But it was a difficult line to maintain, and back on Radio 4, Michelle Hussain tried to pick him up on it.
I'm trying to get your view on what many people regard as a very serious economic and investor confidence picture that has been sparked by the mini budget. And something you could do would be to bring forward the economic and fiscal plan that's scheduled for October the 31st. Is that possible?
No, hold on. You suggest something is causal, which is a speculation. What has caused the effect in pension funds because of some quite high risk but low probability investment strategies is not necessarily the mini budget. It could just as easily be the fact that the day before the Bank of England did not raise interest rates as much as the Federal Reserve did. And I think jumping to conclusions about causality is not meeting the BBC's requirement for impartiality. It is a commentary rather than a factual question.
The mini-budget didn't cause the crisis, and to suggest it did is passing commentary off as fact. So why did the market settle a bit when the cut to the 45p rate of tax was abandoned? And again, when Kwasi Kwarteng brought forward the budget to the 31st of October? And why, in the wake of the fallout of the mini-budget, did the Prime Minister say this?
Of course, we are working closely with the Bank of England. It's very important that monetary and fiscal policy is coordinated. And I recognise there has been disruption, but it was really, really important that we were able to get help to families as soon as possible.
She recognises there was disruption. And it sounds like she recognises that it was the mini budget that caused it. She isn't trying to deny reality to the same extent that Jacob Rees-Mogg is attempting. Dahlia, I get the impression that the reason Jacob Rees-Mogg is, I suppose, more adventurous when it comes to the truth than anyone else on the front bench is he seems to think his plummy accent means he can get away with much more than his colleagues. Is he correct? Can he say literally anything because he sounds as ridiculously posh as he does?
If there's anything I'd agree with him on, it's probably that. I don't think he's had anything much to offer British political life other than speaking to like this weird nostalgia that some people have for like Victorian workhouse guardians, which is what he kind of embodies. And of course, if Diane Abbott, if Zara Sultana, if anyone else came in and tanked the economy within 5 minutes of being in power, I don't think they would be given the grace to even explain themselves in the way that someone like Jacob Rees-Mogg has been given the grace. Diane Abbott has gotten way more flack for misquoting a few numbers than he's gotten to literally lying to the public about their pensions. I'd also love to know why, he keeps saying this thing about, the IMF like being unfriendly towards this British government. And he sort of says it as if it's like a given that we should all know why that is. Why I would love to know his explanation for why the IMF, which is a deeply neoliberal, deeply conservative institution that is responsible for forcing destructive structural adjustment programs around the world in the name of growth, why they would have a problem with this government simply because they are a neoliberal government who wants to promote growth. I would love to know why he thinks that is. But Rees-Mogg comes from this school of political thought that is incredibly dangerous and delusional, but is now pretty much the kind of default ideology in the Conservative Party, which is this sort of Ayn Randian style of politics, where people whose entire wealth and power is exploited from other people's work, other people's labor, and then they turn around and essentially tell the rest of us that, we're all too weak and lazy and unintelligent, and that's why we don't have as much wealth and power as they do. Rees-Mogg's father, who he kind of credits as one of his biggest political inspirations, literally argued that welfare states are not sustainable, they're unfinanceable, and that only the most talented, self-reliant, and technologically adept person will survive in the economically. And it makes me wonder why someone like Rees-Mogg can kind of look at the complete state of our economy and think, well, actually, this is working the way I think an economy should work, where the already rich, the already powerful just simply gain more and more ground in the economy. That fits within his theory of sort of economic natural selection, that the rich and powerful are rich and powerful because they're smarter, they're inherently, biologically, physically, mentally stronger than the rest of us. This is something that used to be called eugenics, but now it's kind of called like entrepreneurialism or whatever. And the best thing that we can do as a society is give those people more power and more wealth because they're the only ones who know how to use it well or effectively. And where he's been thrown for a loop and where it's kind of, I think he's a bit confused, is why institutions that are basically there exclusively to protect the rich and the powerful, such as the IMF, are kind of looking at him like, what are you doing? Like, we might agree with the basic principle here, but you're doing way too much, way too fast, and it's actually not sustainable for us in the long term for our interests. And I think that he's probably a little bit confused by that. But what you have when you have that kind of very elite rearing is that you have this ability to just have complete conviction in what you have done and what you've said, even if the entire world around you is falling apart and is kind of telling you the exact opposite. And that ability, and I think we all, particularly journalists, kind of hear, the accent, and they hear the package it comes in, they see the package it comes in, and they just give him grace that would not be afforded to anyone else. Even under the slightest bit of pressure, he had to resort to the absurd talking point that the BBC was somehow ideologically slanted against the Conservative Party, which, I mean, where have you been for the past 10 years? So yeah, I think it's a mixture of his rearing, his upbringing, the way he kind of the package that he comes in, but also the kind of the broader institutional context that reaffirms that, and that's what we've been seeing in the press over the past several weeks and throughout the entirety of Jacob Rees-Mogg's career.